Alright, I'm going to do a quick dedicated video for all you guys. Well, the two new tech deckers out there, Jeff from Elsie, Michigan, and Peter McCuro from Massachusetts, both picked up their tech decks through Tour Supply in California. I want to give you a heads up on how I go about setting up the neck surgery jig on the tech deck. So you can see I've removed the pivoting neck assembly and then just slipped the jig onto the top neck platform. There's a couple of specific sort of tips I wanted to give you. So you see in the instructions that I sent you guys, and for everyone else out there as well, I have this sort of threaded rod, so I push that rod through like so. I've used that brass threaded indexing pin to adjust the depth of the cutter for the perfect cut. So this indexing pin here protrudes through the underside of the router sled. When you look through the sidewall windows of the neck jig, you'll see the trajectory of the cutter path. We're going into the worst part of the break, and then we sweep up and exit. So underneath here, those two clamps hold the face of the headstock down tight against that U-channel. It pivots and allows the headstock to rest against a flat surface. At this end, the stringer is dropped down almost to the floor of the neck jig. On this end, the stringer is raised to the right height and then tightened in place. Now, the other purpose of the stringer, it will actually pull the walls together. This helps you to adjust the sliding action of the wooden router sled along the rails. There's no looseness, there's no tightness. It slides along there nice and smooth, gives you a perfect cut without any chattering. Now that the indexing pin has done its job, we pull that out of the way so that it doesn't get in the way of the clamps. When it comes time to make your cut, don't try to hog the whole thing out in one shot. What I do is I tilt the router and I keep it on a bit of an angle like this and make my first pass. Then I tilt it in the opposite direction and make my second pass. Then the last time through, I drop it right down and finish the cut. 3 passes to finish the whole job. This is where I make my last adjustment to control the sliding action of the router sled. So you want it to slide with no apparent looseness or tightness. Okay, here we go. Ready to make the cut. On the return pass, I tilt it up this way. And on the final cut, I drop it right down. And I'll make one last pass. And that is how clean of a cut this makes. You'll find a nylon indexing pin that Gibson used to index the fingerboard when they're gluing it into place. You just cut right through that. This gives you an idea of the depth of the cut. Now we're going to flip the router 180 and we're going to do the other side. And this is what we end up with. 2 perfectly parallel elliptical cuts that reach into the worst part of the break. You got to remember that this has been broken twice now, and we'll have 100% contact on all 3 surfaces, the floor and both walls. Perfect fit. So to get a perfect tracing, I just hold that up against the wall and just trace that pencil line all the way along. Here's a slick little trick I use to swap out these discs. Let's put that bristle board on the inside. Line this up, slip it out. Beautiful, we're ready, fresh disc. Now we'll bring it down to the line and just rock that against that 12-inch disc sander. That's what we end up with. There's a reason that this is much thinner than the mahogany spline stock. We've got a perfect fit both sides. Before we go any further, I wanted to show and explain the thin veneer template that we use and why it's so thin. All right, well, I can pull this out of the jig now. And yeah, tomorrow morning I'll mix up some hide glue and we'll install those splines. This is the reason the tracer template is so much thinner than the actual spline stock, because it allows you to drop into that dado and do a visual check. All right, we're just getting ready to mix up some hide glue and we'll glue those splines into place. We've fitted them perfectly now. And the idea of that thin template is it allows you to drop right in to that dado and get a perfect match. Now, I generally get about 4, 5, maybe 6 neck surgeries out of one template. I purposely mix up the grain direction on these mahogany inserts to confuse the grain break memory. If it wants to break in the same place, well, it can't, because you've got 2 other pieces of wood in there with completely different grain direction that is refusing to let it break. It's really about structurally strengthening the headstock. Now that we've finished our dry run and we have an absolutely perfect mechanical fit, we'll mix up that hide glue, glue in those splines, and then let it set overnight before we sand it. I do keep mahogany stock on hand explicitly for this purpose. This guy's dropping big bucks for you to do the job right. I use a brand new bit every single time I do a neck surgery. Now, I do have a 1/4 inch bit, a double fluted straight 1/4 inch bit that I use 90% of the time. If it's an extra bad break, I may step it up to 5/16. Hide glue is nice and hot, bubbling away there, ready to go. A couple of tips about clamping too, I'll tell you in a second. Keep the splines flat on top. So lots of glue in there. Make sure they're not too tight. That mahogany will expand slightly with the glue, and you want to work quickly at this point. I get all 3 sides, the floor and the 2 walls. So we got lots of glue in there. We're not starving that joint. I line up this tip on this end, and we got our spring clamps here. This is why you want it flat on top. One of the many things about hide glue that's nice, you can control the viscosity. This is kind of a medium mixture. It's not too thick. There, for nice and wet. Don't starve that joint. So we get a good solid fit on these splines, and then we'll sand it out and we'll be on to the finishing stage. So that tip down good and tight. And that, we'll let that set up overnight. I'll slip one more clamp in there for good measure. It doesn't take a lot of clamping pressure to hold these splines in. A 4 on each side. And that, my friends, is a done deal. I do want to send a shout out to Peter Mercurio in Massachusetts, Pat Wilson in Australia, and Jeff Kellogg down there in Elsie, Michigan. They're the 3 sort of latest guys that are doing the neck surgery thing. Of course, Hayes Guitars in Ireland, Bobby Longo in New Jersey, Eric Bewley in France, Jeff Rice in Atlanta, Georgia, Steve Curtis in Manchester, who's no doubt about it, this guy's like the king of the neck surgery. He's been doing this a few years now. And Steve Simpson at ultrainspections.com down there in Australia. Hope this helps, guys. I'm sure the veterans have already got this figured out, but I hope there's maybe a tip or 2 in these videos that might help speed up the process for you. Cheers.